Bakir began to imagine a sword. He knew better than anyone that Baskerville-style swordsmanship was not limited to cutting or stabbing. It rips through flesh and breaks bones, as if a sharp tooth were biting. The knight's attack was so powerful that it almost completely severed Bakir's shoulder. Our boy put his hand on his shoulder and couldn't stop himself from screaming in pain. Despite being wounded, Bakir stared at the knight intently, his eyes shining with determination. He wasn't going to give up so easily. Now he understood why the wounds had taken such bizarre shapes. He found it hard to believe that the knight had only used the 8th technique. There was barely a difference, of 1 level. Yet the wound was so deep that even the power of the basilisk from outside the tower was not going to allow it to heal quickly. Our boy had the Beelzebub sword, and in its first slot was the S-rank Madam's Poisonous Feet. In the second slot was the S-rank Immortal Basilisk, and in the third slot was the A+ rank Mushisu of Silent Hill. The knight's attention was focused on Bakir. He silently watched our boy. As smoke came out of his wound, Bakir stared at the knight intently and couldn't help but grit his teeth in anger. For him, an opponent of this level was impressive. The knight drew out his sword, looked away, and a strange energy began to emanate from his body. Even with his hand on the wound, Bakir watched silently, not fully understanding how he was so powerful. The knight turned, and his eyes glowed with malice. He came from the age of chaos, where each family ruled like an independent kingdom. At that time, there was a man who was the most powerful of the 7 counts who led the House of Baskerville to its golden age, a man who, for the sake of power alone, turned away from the world and disappeared. His name was Corso le Baskerville. Bakir stood up and asked, breathing heavily, if he was Corso le Baskerville. The wind began to blow and the knight nodded. Corso's eyes were filled with curiosity. He wanted to know who Bakir was. Since our boy's wound was slowly healing, with an angry expression he introduced himself as Bakir von Baskerville. Corso could not help but be somewhat surprised, knowing that a son, not Els, but Vans, had reached the highest level before he reached adulthood. Bakir looked at the ground, gritting his teeth, and remained silent. Corso also noticed that Bakir had the Beelzebub sword, believed to be lost. In addition, he also noticed his amazing regeneration ability, allowing him to recover even after being subjected to the 8th technique. He admitted that he was an amazing person. Bakir's eyes widened in seriousness. For him, that amazing person was Corso. He admitted that, at first, he didn't even understand the true nature of Baskerville's 8th technique. Corso began walking towards our boy, an intense but powerful aura emanating from his body. Bakir realized that with his senses, he hadn't even been able to feel his life force. But as he revealed his true identity, the aura emanating from him was tearing his skin to pieces. Bakir began to remember Corso's use of the 8th technique, a technique that even our boy couldn't resist. The only thing that was certain was that he had no chance of winning at that moment. With his hand on his wound and a calm gaze, Bakir began to observe Cain closely. He realized that he was the creator of the lurking ambusher technique and wondered how high his true level was. Cain held the hilt of his sword with both hands and decided to reveal his true level. Cain concentrated and slammed his sword into the ground with force, shattering the ground. He then began to remove the bandages on his face. He looked at the ground and revealed that he had accepted many complex emotions in order to achieve the 7th technique. Bakir's eyes widened in surprise and fear, leaving him in shock. He couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. A few seconds later, Cain removed all the bandages from his face and threw them to the ground, creating tension. Cain's face was half burned, and his skull was visible. with eyes shining with determination. He explained that during the battle with the basilisk, on the brink of death, and with a strong desire to survive, he had learned the 8th technique. And finally, upon entering the tower, on the brink of death, he crossed the final threshold. He had reached the end of level 9, Swordmaster, and wrapped in death, he had become a Death Knight. Cain was a Death Knight, also known as the Knight of Death. He was the progenitor of a great knight consumed in the abyss, who possessed pure power and spirit in life. This creature drew mana infinitely from the shadow dimension, beyond death, a power that would not cease, until its body crumbled and its soul faded completely. His risk level, size, and origin were unknown. Bikir swallowed hard, and his eyes widened in confusion. He began to feel a terror he had never felt before. He couldn't believe this was the 9th form, the true highest level of a swordmaster. Cain began to observe our boy in silence, without saying a single word. He was a being who had accepted death itself in pursuit of mastery. Cain started to gaze toward the ground, and with a calm voice revealed that the lurking ambusher was not his creation. Cain began to recall what he had read in a book. He extended his hand and admitted that he had not reached the 10th form. To reach that level, one had to die once and be resurrected, and although he had certainly died, he was not someone who had come back to life. As a strange energy emerged from Cain's skull, he began to imagine the strange tree, and with a sincere gaze, he revealed that as a Death Knight, he could not be resurrected, and for this reason, he had been trapped in this place. Bikir's eyes widened with confusion and curiosity. He questioned how someone of Cain's level could be trapped, wondering what exactly this place was and who had imprisoned him. As the torches illuminated the place, Cain began to ponder. He acknowledged that Bikir knew nothing, but this was understandable, as there was no one who knew of this place. Our boy became even more curious. As Cain's eyes shone with sadness, he revealed that this place was the tomb of the stabbed blade, a site where the life and death of the first Baskerville were intertwined. Bikir, who was panting to catch his breath, listened in silence without. Interrupting, Cain revealed that the cradle where the first Baskerville was born was called the Cradle of the Stabbed Blade, and this was the place where he met his death. It was a site where the worthy, as if by fate, reached the truth of the sword. Only a true Baskerville could die in this tomb, and the fact that Bikir had found this place was proof that destiny had guided him. Bikir's mind flooded with questions and confusion. With a serious gaze, he asked what Cain was talking about. Cain began to imagine himself sitting on the throne, chained. It was the tower that had imprisoned him, binding him so he could never leave. Someone slowly began to open the door to the place, letting in the sunlight. The person who had opened the door was none other than Bikir. The Grave of Blades had assigned Cain the role of its guardian, the one tasked with welcoming the true Baskerville. As its protector, he was destined to guide him toward the 10th style. Over time, Cain had come to understand that someone who carried the true destiny of a Baskerville would find him one day. This person was the only one who could free him, a being who could not even die, from this eternity of suffering. Bikir's wound had already healed completely. With a serene expression, he questioned if he was that fated one. Cain's eyes, whose hands were resting on the pommel of his sword, began to shine with tranquility. He knew that Bikir could reach the end of the Baskerville 10 forms, but to achieve it he would have to face him and experience death. Cain pulled out his sword, which was stuck in the ground, and the blade began to glow. He made it clear that until their duel concluded, Bikir would not take a single step out of this place. He would kill Bikir, and Bikir, in turn, had to reach the 10th form to kill him. With a gaze full of determination and confidence, he affirmed that Bikir must free him, for this was the destiny decreed by the tower. Instead of feeling fear, Bakir's eyes began to shine with confidence. Showing the blade of his sword, he told Cain not to talk nonsense. Destiny was a boring concept to him. He only believed in his own decisions. A powerful aura began to emerge from Bakir's body. Our boy adopted an offensive stance and decided to attack with everything he had, making it clear that he would kill him and leave this place. Cain simply stood in silence, ready to continue the duel. Bakir gritted his teeth hard, and in the blink of an eye, he appeared in front of Cain. The Death Knight's eyes widened in surprise and confusion. He couldn't believe Bakir's skill had increased so much. With a furious expression, Cain prepared to counterattack, questioning if Bakir was mocking destiny. Just before our boy could take another breath, Cain attacked swiftly, striking our boy under the jaw. Bakir gritted his teeth and his eyes began to burn with rage. He couldn't believe Cain had counterattacked with his bare hands. The Death Knight didn't waste another second. He grabbed his sword and prepared to attack. Again, Cain swung the sword forcefully, questioning if Bakir believed he could escape his. Luckily, Bakir reacted in time and was able to block the attack, but in the process, his body was sent flying backward. Bakir staggered back, and as he caught his breath, his attention fixed on Cain. He felt somewhat confused, noticing that not even a surprise attack had worked. Cain asked if he thought he could catch his breath in the middle of a life-or-death fight. Hearing this, Bakir snapped out of his thoughts, his eyes filling with surprise. Cain moved like a thunderclap, and by the time Bakir noticed, the Death Knight was only inches away, ready to strike again. Cain swung his sword with precision, but luckily, Bakir was quick. Using his Beelzebub sword, he managed to block the attack. Our boy gritted his teeth hard and, with a surprised expression, realized that Cain was incredibly fast and that the difference in their levels was overwhelming. Our boy decided not to give up. For this very reason, he would break the gap with his ultimate technique, the technique he trusted most in his 2 lives, before and after his return. As Bakir's eyes shone with determination, he decided it was time to use the 4th Baskerville technique. Noticing this, Cain gripped his sword tightly and decided to use the 5th Baskerville technique, and a powerful energy began to emerge from his blade. Just before Bakir could take another breath, Cain attacked with a powerful and devastating slash, making it clear that Bakir couldn't escape this destiny either. The difference in power was so enormous that Bakir took the full brunt of the attack. He opened his mouth and began to scream in agony, but far from giving up, Bakir gritted his teeth, and his eyes began to shine. In the blink of an eye, Bakir lunged at Cain and imbued all his mana into his sword. With a piercing gaze, he decided it was time to use the 6th Baskerville technique. Cain watched our boy in silence. Far from dodging the attack, Cain began to charge toward Bakir and decided to counterattack using the 7th Baskerville technique. The result was devastating. Just before Bakir could even attack, Cain's sword pierced his chest like an arrow of mana. Bakir's body was sent flying with great force and crashed against the statue of one of the swords. Blood began to gush from his wounds, and Bakir started to cough, realizing that nothing was working. Cain was dodging all of his attacks. Cain raised his sword, lunged at our boy, and began to imbue all his mana into the blade, summoning a mana so powerful that Bakir had never seen before. Cain was a monster. Cain's eyes began to glow with rage. He told our boy to try and stop the attack with his sword. Hearing this, Bakir gritted his teeth, knowing he couldn't give up. With his body covered in cuts and deep wounds, Bakir began to charge toward Cain and use the 7th Baskerville technique. But as always, Cain used a more advanced technique than Bakir. The Death Knight unleashed the 9th technique. An intense mana began to emerge from his sword, which expanded throughout the entire place. Kane swung his sword with precision. As the slash slowly approached, Bekir panicked, knowing this wasn't good. The slash hit Bekir head-on, making his eyes wide in fear. Kane's mana made Bekir experience a pain he had never felt before. Its mana began to course through his entire body, destroying every part. Our boy opened his mouth, and not long after, as the sunlight illuminated the place, he fell to his knees. Kane watched in silence. Bekir's body was covered in cuts, and despite being a strong warrior, he was no match for Kane. Not long after, Bekir fell defeated to the ground. Kane's attention fixed on him, and his mind filled with questions and disappointment. Bekir had a deep gash on his shoulder and back, and the ground was covered in blood. Bekir felt as if he were in a river of blood. Several minutes later, our boy slowly began to open his eyes. Bekir's body was floating in blood, and in front of him was a door. He didn't know what this place was.